think we're all really excited about the garden shaft. Craig, why the garden shaft? What interests you about it?
The water sample had gold in it.
For more than a decade, the mystery of Oak Island has kept millions of people searching for answers. Countless clues have been uncovered, tunnels have been explored, and secrets buried beneath the island have slowly begun to reveal themselves. But now, everything may be about to change. What if the biggest discovery has already been made? What if what we've been watching unfold is only the beginning of something far bigger? Recent developments surrounding the Oak Island investigation could bring researchers closer than ever to answering one of history's most enduring mysteries. And, if the discoveries now coming to light are any indication, what happens next could take the entire story in a direction no one saw coming. So, before we uncover what may be waiting beneath the island, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is one Oak Island discovery you won't want to miss. Because the real question is no longer simply, what is buried on Oak Island? The question is, what happens when the truth is finally uncovered? And trust me, what comes next could change the Oak Island story forever. The clue beneath the surface. For generations, the search for answers on Oak Island has centered around one legendary place, the Money Pit. But the farther investigators pushed beneath the surface, the more complicated the story became. What initially appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary underground shaft was surrounded by strange structures, possible flood systems, and other unusual features. Together, they suggested that whatever had been placed below may not have been hidden by accident. Someone may have deliberately designed the site to make reaching whatever lay beneath it as difficult as possible. And that leads to a much bigger question. What could possibly have been valuable enough to justify such an elaborate system of protection? If the Money Pit was simply an old treasure cache, then the complexity of the underground construction becomes difficult to explain. But if the entire area was intentionally engineered as a hiding place, then every tunnel, chamber, barrier, and unusual feature may have been part of a much larger design. And this is where the Oak Island mystery takes an unexpected turn. Some of the evidence discovered over the years has encouraged researchers to consider a possibility that sounds almost impossible. The island itself may have been prepared long before the famous treasure hunt ever began. If that were true, then the early treasure hunters may not have been the first people searching for something on Oak Island. They could have been following traces deliberately left behind by people who came centuries earlier. Suddenly, this stops looking like a simple story about buried treasure. Instead, Oak Island begins to resemble a carefully constructed secret, one designed to survive for generations, because whoever created it understood exactly how difficult it would be to uncover. But that creates an even more important mystery. If all of this effort was intended to protect something, what was so important that someone went to such extraordinary lengths to conceal it? And the answer may not be sitting inside the Money Pit at all. It could be connected to a clue discovered somewhere investigators never expected. A clue that might take the search far beyond the famous excavation site. The mystery beyond the island. At this point, the Oak Island story begins to look far larger than a single underground chamber. For centuries, investigators have encountered objects, markings, structures, and geological features that seem strangely out of place. Each discovery has fueled theories about who might have reached the island long before modern treasure hunters ever arrived. But there is another possibility, one that makes the entire mystery even more compelling. What if Oak Island was never supposed to be the final destination? What if the island was only one part of a much larger puzzle? That possibility completely changes the way every discovery can be viewed. Instead of examining each strange clue as an isolated piece of evidence, researchers can begin asking whether seemingly unrelated discoveries might actually belong to the same story. And that is where things become especially fascinating. If someone intentionally selected Oak Island as a place to hide something, they would have needed a reason to choose that particular location. They would have needed an understanding of the island's landscape, its underground conditions, and possibly even the surrounding coastline. In other words, Oak Island itself may not have simply been the hiding place. The island could have been part of the secret, and if that theory is correct, the strange underground structures may have served a purpose beyond simply protecting whatever was buried below. They may have been designed to protect a trail that could potentially lead investigators back to the people who created the mystery, and perhaps reveal exactly what they were so determined to keep hidden. But there is another clue that makes this possibility even harder to dismiss. because when investigators began looking beyond the famous money pit, they encountered evidence pointing toward an entirely different part of the island. And that discovery may hold the key to understanding why this small piece of land became the center of one of the world's most enduring unsolved mysteries. The evidence that refuses to disappear. The deeper the investigation goes, the more difficult it becomes to dismiss the clues that continue to emerge. Just when one possibility seems to explain the mystery, another discovery raises an entirely new set of questions. And somewhere beneath, or perhaps beyond, the places researchers have already searched, there may still be a piece of evidence waiting to connect everything together. The deeper investigators go, the more difficult it becomes to dismiss the possibility that at least some of what lies beneath Oak Island was intentionally created. For years, skeptics have offered more ordinary explanations. They argue that the island's unusual formations could be natural features, remnants of earlier mining operations, or simply the result of centuries of excavation by treasure hunters who repeatedly disturbed the ground. But there is a problem with that theory. Not every piece of evidence fits. Some discoveries appear to point toward deliberate planning. Others suggest organization and a surprisingly detailed understanding of the island's underground environment and how that environment could potentially be controlled or manipulated. And when multiple unusual features begin appearing within the same investigation, it becomes increasingly difficult to explain everything as coincidence. That is precisely why the newest evidence matters. Researchers are no longer looking for a single dramatic discovery that will instantly solve the mystery. Instead, they are stepping back and examining the entire puzzle, comparing different locations, studying historical records, revisiting old discoveries, and asking whether clues separated by years or even distance might actually be connected. And if those connections prove to be real, the Oak Island mystery could be far more complicated than the search for a single legendary treasure chest. It could involve an entire hidden operation. Think about what that would mean. A location carefully chosen for a specific purpose, an underground system deliberately constructed, clues potentially left behind for someone to discover later, and a secret considered important enough to remain concealed for centuries. Suddenly, the endless cycle of discoveries and unanswered questions begins to make sense. Every time investigators believe they are finally approaching the solution, another mystery seems to emerge. But then there is one detail that could potentially change the entire investigation. Among the many clues associated with Oak Island are pieces of evidence that may help answer a question researchers have been asking for generations. Who possessed the knowledge, resources, and motivation to construct something like this? And once investigators seriously begin pursuing that question, the story takes an unexpected direction, because the search may no longer be focused only on what was left behind. It may finally begin revealing something about the people who were responsible for it. The people behind the mystery. For decades, the central question surrounding Oak Island has seemed obvious. What was hidden there? But perhaps that question has been leading investigators in the wrong direction. Before we can understand what may have been concealed, we may first need to determine who was capable of concealing it. Some of the island's most puzzling features have raised questions about the level of knowledge required to create them. If these structures were intentionally built, their construction could have involved an understanding of excavation, water management, navigation, engineering, and the complex conditions beneath the island. And that dramatically changes the possibilities. This may not have been the work of someone who simply buried an object and disappeared. If the underground systems were deliberately designed, then whoever created them may have spent an enormous amount of time planning the site, considering not only how to hide something, but also how to prevent future explorers from ever reaching it. And that leads to an extraordinary possibility. Maybe the greatest secret on Oak Island isn't a treasure chest. Maybe it's the identity of the people who arrived here first. Over the years, historical documents, ancient maps, artifacts, and archaeological discoveries have all contributed to theories about different groups that could potentially have had some connection to the island. Some of those theories appear more convincing than others. But if even one of them can be supported by enough evidence, it could completely change how we understand the origins of the Oak Island mystery. Some of these theories remain deeply controversial, while others continue to divide researchers. But one point is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The more evidence investigators assemble, the harder it becomes to describe Oak Island as nothing more than an ordinary treasure hunt. If the people responsible for the mystery intentionally created a trail, then somewhere along that trail, there should be something that reveals their purpose. It could be a distinctive symbol, a hidden signature, a connection to another location, or perhaps something far more physical and undeniable. And this brings the investigation to one of its most fascinating moments, because the next major clue may not reveal what was hidden on Oak Island. It could answer an even more important question. Why did it have to be hidden there at all? And if researchers can finally answer that, the entire Oak Island mystery could take on a completely different meaning. What was worth hiding? If someone went to such extraordinary lengths to conceal something on Oak Island, then eventually we have to ask the question that sits at the heart of the entire mystery. What could have been important enough to justify all of this? For centuries, the most obvious explanation has been treasure, gold, silver, jewels, perhaps even a legendary fortune that was lost to history. That idea is what transformed Oak Island into one of the world's most famous treasure mysteries. But the deeper investigators look, the less satisfying that explanation becomes. A fortune may be incredibly valuable, but would money alone justify an elaborate underground system designed to confuse explorers, redirect water, and potentially protect a hidden location for centuries? Maybe the real prize wasn't something that could simply be sold or spent. Maybe its value was completely different. What if it carried historical importance, political significance, or even religious meaning? That possibility opens an entirely new chapter in the story. Throughout history, people have gone to extraordinary lengths to protect objects, manuscripts, sacred relics, and information that could fundamentally change how future generations understood the past. If something like that was ever transported to Oak Island, then perhaps the money pit wasn't simply intended to function as a treasure vault. Perhaps it was something closer to a time capsule, a carefully protected place designed to preserve an object, or secret until someone, centuries later, was finally capable of finding it. And that possibility could explain one of the most frustrating aspects of the entire investigation. The clues seem to reveal just enough to keep the search alive. Yet somehow, the final answer always remains beyond reach. But there is another possibility that makes this even more intriguing. What if the original builders actually expected someone to discover their secret one day? If that was the case, they may have left behind some kind of message, a signal designed to tell future investigators that they were moving in the right direction. And researchers may have already encountered fragments of that message without understanding their true significance. Because the next clue takes us away from the tunnels, away from the money pit, and towards something that could potentially connect Oak Island to a much larger historical mystery. And if that connection turns out to be genuine, then the treasure may be only the first chapter. The connection no one expected. Until now, most discussions about Oak Island have focused on a single question. What is buried beneath the ground? But what if that isn't where the most important evidence is located? As researchers revisit historical maps, written accounts, artifacts, and the island's unusual physical features, another possibility begins to emerge. Perhaps Oak Island wasn't an isolated mystery at all. Perhaps it was connected to events taking place far beyond its shores. That doesn't necessarily mean one secret expedition or a single legendary organization was responsible for everything. The reality could be much more complicated. It could involve a journey, the movement of valuable objects, a carefully selected location, and a trail that may have stretched across the Atlantic before eventually ending on this remote island. This is what makes Oak Island so fascinating. For years, various historical theories have attempted to connect the island with people and events that existed long before the modern treasure hunt began. Some of those ideas remain highly controversial. Others are built around fragments of evidence that continue to generate intense debate. But perhaps the most important question isn't whether every theory is correct. It is this: why do so many separate clues continue to raise the possibility that Oak Island had connections beyond the island itself? If someone truly transported something valuable to Oak Island, they would have needed a way to move it, protect it, and eventually conceal it. And that means the story may not have begun on Oak Island at all. Perhaps the island was simply the final destination of a journey whose origins have disappeared into history. Now, investigators are left with the difficult task of reconstructing that journey from scattered evidence. But then comes the possibility that could change everything. What if one of those scattered pieces has already been discovered? What if it contains enough information to tell researchers exactly where they should look next? Because if that clue can be convincingly connected to Oak Island's history, the investigation could finally move beyond speculation. It could provide something far more concrete, a missing link between the mystery beneath Oak Island and the people who may have placed it there in the first place. And that is why the next discovery could be more important than anything investigators have uncovered before, may have brought the secret to the island in the first place. The mystery may be far from over. After generations of searching, Oak Island has evolved into something far greater than a simple hunt for buried treasure. It has become an enormous puzzle assembled from history, archaeology, speculation, forgotten accounts, and mysterious clues that have somehow survived the passage of time. And perhaps that is exactly why the mystery has remained alive for so long. Every time investigators seem to be approaching an answer, another question appears. Every discovery solves one piece of the puzzle, only to reveal another piece that is even harder to explain. But maybe that is the real lesson Oak Island has been trying to teach us. The central mystery may not simply be whether something valuable is buried beneath the island. The deeper question may be why someone would go to such extraordinary lengths to hide it. Was it a fortune, a collection of priceless historical objects, a lost document, a forgotten record, or something whose true importance has yet to be recognized? Right now, no single theory can explain every strange detail surrounding Oak Island. But the investigation has produced something that may ultimately prove just as important as a final treasure discovery. A growing body of evidence that continues to challenge our understanding of what may have happened here. And that means the story may not be coming to an end. It could actually be approaching its most important chapter. Future excavations could uncover new evidence. Archaeological research could provide answers that were previously impossible to obtain. And a forgotten historical record could someday emerge and connect pieces of the puzzle that have remained separate for centuries. If even a few of those missing pieces finally come together, the entire story of Oak Island could be rewritten. So, perhaps the biggest question isn't, is the Oak Island mystery finally over? Maybe the real question is much more intriguing. Are we finally getting close enough to uncover what the original builders never wanted the world to find? And if the next episode, or the next season, reveals even one major piece of that puzzle, Oak Island could once again leave audiences questioning everything they thought they knew. Because sometimes a mystery isn't solved simply because the final clue has been discovered. Sometimes it is solved when we finally understand what all the clues were trying to tell us. And that is precisely why the next chapter of the Oak Island story could be its most important one yet.